Okay, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I received a bunch of questions today that inspired this video. Props to the awesome lady that sent them through. Have a bit of chocolate on my face. But anyway, Sister Naima, she might be wondering why on earth I've gone and done a video about this. There were just a bunch of questions that she wanted to ask me off the cuff, but I've been thinking about what she actually, subhanAllah, just dropped me a line about for a long time, and I thought, well, I've talked about it, I've typed about it, but I haven't done a video about it yet, so why not? And I'm in my studio today / bedroom, and yes, it's the best kind of studio to have. I have some of my drawings behind me, not because I'm going through this weird anime / art deco / floral watercolor period of my time as an artist, but just because it's kind of good to look at your work all up on a wall every now and again and get people to comment and tell you, even to see where you're going with a certain project, which is what this is about. So anyway, on to Sister Naima's questions. As you guys probably guessed from the title of the video, and also me as an artist talked about this in the Muslim community, mentored about it. A bunch of you guys have asked me questions about how to get onto an architecture degree or an arts course, which is, I've done both. I did a foundation at Central St. Martin's, and I did my architecture degree from the Bartlett in London. So, you know, been around for a while promoting Muslim women, especially ones that wear hijab, to do what they love and do it with passion and do it with an absolute sense of freedom, which doesn't mean become another Damien Hirst, but what does it mean? So let's go into the questions that Sister Naima kindly sent me through. The first question she asked me is, do you think that it's important for Muslim children to study art as a subject in school? If so, why? If not, why not? And if you guys have comments to add with any of these questions, you're more than welcome to. First of all, I don't think Muslims should send their kids to school anyway, full stop. I think children should be homeschooled as much as possible. It is the way to go. I was actually working with an artist back last year in summer who would actually one-on-one teach children that were being homeschooled, and I've met a bunch of kids that have homeschooled. You know, you guys probably see TED Talks by 13-year-olds that have started their own businesses that are homeschooled. It is definitely the way to go compared to the prison model of state school nowadays, where they're being force-fed odd ideas and all kinds of rubbish and weird behavior. I really believe that if you have the resources to homeschool your kids, you should do that. And on your homeschool curriculum, art should feature as an absolute fundamental subject that you teach your children. Why is that? Well, first of all, Muslims tend to be very, how can I say, challenged when it comes to their understanding of what looks beautiful. I don't know why that is, but if I did a thesis, for example, on the appearance of migrant living rooms, and what I found in my research was that the decor that we tend to choose just for our living rooms is very like cliche and almost the same, no matter which nationality you are. If you're Yemeni, if you're Pakistani, if you're from the Caribbean, chances are, not just Muslim, but in like migrant and Muslim clumps together with this, chances are you have a repertoire of visual things that you tend to find nice, like glitter, like cliche stuff like that, like floral, and they all actually have a story embedded in colonialism, where, for example, how many people have sofas in their houses that they put a leather on, or like a crocheted sheet that you put where your head is supposed to go. Now that comes from a colonial period where white men would oiled hair used to put their heads on leather sofas, and to stop the stain from going on the leather, they'd put a white, usually they'd put a cloth behind them. So just small things like that, like, you know, you might be like, where is she going with this? But basically a lot of the way that the things that we find beautiful and the things that we tend to consider to be appealing aesthetically have actually been passed on to us without being challenged for hundreds of years, and be that from our colonizers, our quote unquote rulers, you know, and we haven't actually contextualize what it is that we find beautiful. Now you might look at the wall behind me and think, well, you find anime from Japan and this Art Nouveau-ish style from 1920s beautiful. No. Again, this is me just like exploring, experimenting, kind of showing off to myself that I can draw maybe as well for a little bit, just like, oh, check me out, I can do figures and faces, aren't I so cool, kind of thing. Everybody goes through that moment, I guess, where they're a bit insecure as an artist and they kind of want to do a project here or there that draws out some skill, whatever that looks like to them. So, you know, being an artist is a journey. Being a creative person is a journey, and you have to be allowed to start exploring that from a very young age. I had art. Actually, the funny thing is, Sister Naima, let me go back to your question. I actually was given admission into a private school in Pakistan based on my artistic ability at the time. It's weird. It was preschool, and we had like we had a bunch of tests, and one of the tests was we had to color something in, and apparently I colored each petal on the flower a different color, and I was very obsessive about it being in the lines. And the teacher looked at that and said, this girl is very intelligent and she's going to be an artist one day. Props to you. Or maybe my parents telling me that story over and over and again had an effect on my understanding of my talents. But anyway, the point is that it's very important to expose children to a huge spectrum of what they're capable of, and art is one of those skills that they should definitely. And anyway, when I went to Islamic school, there was a period of a formative period between the ages of 10 and 13 where I wasn't drawing at all, and I wasn't given any formal training in Pakistan either, the way training is given in the West for how you should draw, what understanding you have of art history. I really began my formal training in school. How formal is that? 1 hour a week as an artist when I was in grade 9. So I actually taught myself everything, which is proof that if you have talent, you actually don't need to be taught. You will have a desire within yourself to perfect what it is that you have, and you just want to make it amazing. You give yourself challenges. I was very lucky to have mentors along the way as well. People in my own family that are like working for Vera Wong and design characters for Harbinger magazine and Werewolf and Warhammer the game. I have people like that, access to people like that I could ask to help me with my drawing. So I was lucky in that sense, and I knew that in my family I have a history of incredible artists. So I was lucky to have faith in my ability, even though I was never taught officially until I was a lot older. So yeah, that's my answer. It's very important, and yeah, of course you should study art. It's fundamental. If you have a skill, one day you could be making as much money as Damien Hirst, which is millions a year. Would you ever want to rob another person of being able to make that kind of money? You know, it's why not? So what do you think that Muslim children's art education should include? It should definitely include everything that normal art education includes, but a very critical look on current modern culture. I know the question about nudity is coming up, and we will talk about that, but the way art is taught nowadays in school, I mean, the way it was taught to me, I have no problem whatsoever with the way that art is taught. I think in England particularly, it's a thorough and excellent art education. I'm so lucky to have been educated from there, even though initially, I mean, maybe Japan is better, Denmark is a bit better, but yeah, like then there's a whole debate about, see, it's not just Muslims that have issues with what art is and how it should be taught. It's society in general. Like, you know, should you be taught skills? Should you be taught craft-based? Should you be taught theory? Should you be left to find your own style? These are all questions that the profession faces, no matter which country, which religion, who you are that's studying. So it's an open book, really. I think I'm from the school that believes in doing, so you actually have to have the skill to do things right, and also exploration. Now we're going into robotics. People are doing, some people are just thinking that to pick up a paintbrush and do stuff like what you see on the wall is ridiculous. I can do this on a computer and send it through to a robot to mill it out for me in wood or metal if I wanted to. And I could have a sculpture, 3D, of what I've just drawn behind me within minutes. So it's not really sense making to just, sit there and make yourself feel good about drawings like this anymore. Sometimes people do, people are exploring new things every day. And I was shocked when I learned coding that, you can type a bunch of lines of code on your computer and it will generate pages and pages of completely perfect, ornate, geometric design just automatically without you ever needing to know what Islamic geometry is or how it works. And Islamic geometry, interestingly enough, the way it started and the reason why it became so popular and what it was a study of was a visual representation of the movements of the planets around and their orbits. It was a study of the orbits of the planets. That's the pattern of the 8-pointed star. It's Venus, the way Venus moves around the Earth. So technology and art has always had this dance, and what you should learn depending on the technology is constantly changing. The upheaval that the arts had in Impressionism and rejecting the classics, rejecting how things should be done, was when photography came into play. So that's happening again now with the computer, the internet, robotics, iPad. Just you have artists like David Hockney doing paintings on his iPad. So it's what are you going to teach kids? You have to teach them how to think creatively and be open to exploring whatever medium they need to explore in order to express what they want to do and challenge themselves. That's the education that I had. Go figure out what that means. So what should Muslim children be taught art history? Yes, this is so fundamental. An understanding of art history is, I'm a total art history geek. Like, I actually went and spent a lot of my money buying art history books, which are like this thick. This thing, I think the size of my head. Yeah, and I sit there and I read them. Like, my husband's always perplexed whenever we go to the library. I just go to the art history section and I'm just always looking at the same books of Michelangelo, like, wow, the Pieta at 25, how did he do this, blah 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 blah. Like, I'm just absolutely fascinated by art history. Okay, admitted, a lot of it is made up. Was Rome really where it is? Was the what were the movements really what they say they were? But a critical eye of knowing what Islamic history is actually has such a huge eye-opening and fascinating way of you interpreting European art history. Because when you then look at modernism and you're like, well, Cube and the way they set their cities up is just like how Mecca is laid out, how streets in Algeria are laid out. And isn't it funny that they started building like that in the 30s when the Ottomans were dismantled? And and then you realize the worth of what your people left behind. And art history is just incredible. It gives you so much as a confidence as a person in your culture, in your history, in your where you come from, your story. And to know that, wow, my great-grandparents did this. My great-grandfather sculpted the 2 lions in a park that's named after those lions. So I've always been fascinated by art history. Like, my ancestors literally left their legacy in the arts. So that's why I would definitely say, especially if you have people in your trade, in your family trade that did work related to art history, then you should definitely study it, because it's about knowing yourself. Should Muslims be introduced to the classics? Again, yes, definitely. For example, Dante's Divine Comedy actually has the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned in it. I mean, the way it has him mentioned in it is absolutely disgusting and awful, but if we'd known that, Christian authors were writing books like the Divine Comedy in the 1400s, mentioning the Prophet ﷺ the way it mentioned him, in the, astaghfirullah, the lower circle of hell, and Salahuddin was in the higher circle because they liked how nice he was to the Christians, whatever. But, then we'd take it easy when people make videos about and cartoons about the Prophet ﷺ, because actually they have behaved like that before in history towards our religion, and we didn't have such a fit about it. So, you know, we'd become more educated and more, we'd just be way more educated. We'd read more if we actually read the classics. You know how big the Divine Comedy is? And it's a long poem translated from Italian. And those of you that know Latin and Italian know that they just tend to use commas and not full stops. So very long sentences. But you'd be used to that if you read Jane Austen. But yeah, like it's absolutely fundamental. Read Homer, read the Odyssey, read the Nataraja, the Hindu classics as well. I've read all of these things, and it really opens my view of where. So when you see something, when you see like a bird of peace, that's a dove, you'll know what the cultural significance of that is. You'll understand what the cultural significance of things that you take for granted on a daily basis are. Why people say certain things, do certain things. You have a way more nuanced and sensitive understanding of the environment around you if you study the classics, because you know where things come from, especially if you plan on living in this part of the world. You should study the classics from your history, and you should study the classics from their history. And you should, the beautiful bit is where they intersect, and where they're common, and where they overlap, and where some things have been hidden to try and dominate others, and vice versa. It's fascinating. It's like detective work. It's so cool. And finally, how should a Muslim art curriculum deal with artwork that goes against the Sharia, either in terms of classics, art, or education in their own work? Nudity, she's mentioned, is against Sharia. Okay. This is where she's left the most interesting question till last, I see. Thank you for that. But yeah, okay, so nudity is against Sharia, and obviously you can't have pornography all over the place like they do in the Catholic Church, and then they wonder why their priests are pedophilic. Maybe it's got to do with all those naked cherubs flying around. But anyway, the point is nudity has been capped in Islam. But I'd like to point out the fact that artists in Italy were digging up graves and drawing, cutting up, you know, I'm going somewhere with this, not somewhere creepy, don't worry, cutting up bodies of dead corpses and figuring out how the bones clothed with meat, how they clothed with blood vessels and then skin. You know, they drew the diagrams, and then the artist studied those diagrams. Similarly, in Islamic medicine, if you look at the diagrams, there are new diagrams everywhere. They're utilized for medicine, but initially they employ artists to make those depictions. So artists actually need to know how the human body structures itself. And to give an example of this, when I was in 12th grade, year 12, doing my first year, actually it was my final year of of A-levels in year 13, my art teacher noticed that I was drawing a lot of form in my work. I'd actually taken it upon myself not to just do calligraphy or the standard stuff that Muslims do, but to explore form, because it's something new. It's something in my family. We do that kind of work. As I mentioned to you, my uncle's done, like, you know, Warhammer, and my cousin's designed for Real Wrong. So it's in my family to explore that direction. And when I did figure drawing, he looked at the figures and he said, yeah, but you don't know how this body looks behind the clothes, and it's obvious from the lack of confidence in your drawing. You know, it's a bit frumpy, it's too long in some places. You haven't seen and drawn a naked body, and it's obvious in your work. So either stop or do it properly. And then when he saw my hesitation, he went on to say, you know, this isn't something perverts do. It's not something that people that are weird or have some sort of strange inclination tend to do. If you're serious about knowing how things stand up and how structure works, especially if you want to go into architecture, the most complicated structure is the human body. You have to figure out how it actually works. It's like a doctor studying a specimen and noting it down. You don't have to share your drawings with anyone, but at least figure out how it works. You know, doctors study naked bodies all the time. Why is it suddenly that when an artist does it to further their understanding of how structure works and how things should look, it's haram? And when it comes to what you depict, that's a different story. But what you study you have to know how things look like if you're a serious artist. Otherwise, it's just a jokeable. I mean, then it's another debate, like, are we going in towards realism like the Europeans did? Because Muslims were never realistic in their depiction of the human body. You can compare the way Western, actually any form of Eastern art, Buddhist art, Chinese art, Japanese art, very rarely were they focused on depicting the human body in its most realistic form. That was a European thing, realism. But, you know, and they had shortcuts to figure that out. You know, they used lenses and projection, and then they would trace over the image of the body that they'd see to get it as accurate as possible. So, you know, yeah, you learn so much about the paintings that you're so impressed by. You're like, oh, there's just a tracing job, some of them. You know, and these are things you learn when you study art history. It's so empowering as an artist. And then you'll be like, oh, so I don't have to be that crazily talented. And they're actually secrets. The image makers had the most power always in society. Like the center of Italy, where all the images came from in the Renaissance, was a secret place, and nobody knew how it functions or what they did. And Hollywood nowadays, lo and behold, a secret place. Nobody knows what they do in those studios and how they manage to put those incredible graphics together. The people that hold the power of making the image are the most advanced usually in society, because, you know, they give people vision and they control and dictate what people tend to see and what they hold as an ideal. So that's the power that Muslims are denying themselves every time they say art is not a serious thing for their kids to study. With regards to Sharia, there needs to be scholars need to discuss this. I spoke to scholars before I went and took classes where I did life drawing. It's called life drawing. That's the official word for it. And they completely gave me permission and said, for your studies, it's fine. But when it comes to what you use it for and what you do with it, it has to be within the bounds of, you know, not being obscene. And this is a huge contribution that Muslim artists can make to the art world, you know, especially with the technology we have available now. Like, what are we going to do with all these robots? And what are we going to do with all this coding? Where are we going to take it? Where are the new dimensions that we're going to explore with it? Or abstract or realist, or, you know, it's a really interesting conversation. So thank you again, Sister Naima, for those questions. I hope I did them justice. And do I have any more decent drawings here? I don't know. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.